So welcome back. So happy you joined me again on another episode of the You're in Charge Now What podcast. Today we're going to talk about sales. It's one of those topics that I think everyone is intrigued by, everyone is frustrated by. Hiring salespeople, training salespeople, getting a great process together, understanding your customers, how to communicate. Now there's multiple platforms. How do you connect with them everywhere can be overwhelming and a little bit frustrating. So today I brought in very special guest, Dan Englender. He is the owner of a company called Sales Schema, and he helps organizations with sales, both from a process strategy development course, as well as also helping them if this organization needs some people on the phones or reaching out to some of their clients to get sales started or getting that pipeline started. His company can help as well. He's also the host of the Digital Agency Growth podcast. So I'm excited to start listening in on that as well. Wonderful individual, a lot of very good tactical things that you're going to take away from this conversation to help your organization really thrive and really look at your whole sales process in a completely different light. He talks about something called relationship sales and how that really works and why it's important in today's market. So let's dive in to today's episode of You're in Charge Now What with Dan Englender of Sales Schema. All right, so Dan, let's just dive right into the sort of elephant or the burden that every single company has, and that is sales. And I very rarely have ever run across anyone who's happy and says, "Oh, I got it all figured out." So to lead off, your company helps people in sales. So when you're out there and someone raises their hand and you come in and you sit down with them, what are some very common either struggles or mistakes that companies are making in regards to sales?
Yeah, Glenn, thanks again for having me. And that's a really good starting question, I think. I think the biggest one that we see is we get somebody that either doesn't have the time or the motivation to do it. Maybe they've inherited this role, or somebody thinks that sales can be kind of like this halfway in, halfway out kind of role.
Right.
Right. And that's that. And I'm not saying that sometimes, if you're an owner or you're with a small business, that's just the way it is. I'm not saying that you can't wear multiple hats. I'm just saying that know what the job is and know what you're doing. And sometimes I was on a call, yesterday with somebody, and they were like, I'm not really into sales. I don't really want to get sales training. I don't really want to they just weren't committed to it. But yet somebody from higher up had said, you're the new salesperson, right? So it's like, how did this happen? What do they think is going to happen? Right. So that hopefully, most people are beyond that, but that's one thing that we see. I think beyond that, once we do have somebody that's committed in a sales role, I think when we say the word sales, that's like a dozen different skill sets, right?
Sure.
The process of teeing up meetings at scale and building lists and dealing with the software and the copy and all that is a completely different skill set than the person that is presenting, which is a different skill set than the person that might be working on a proposal. There's so many different things that go into that. So the answer is, the other thing that's happening is there's this kind of lone wolf thing where it's I'm going to hire this full stack salesperson that's going to solve all my problems, which is also silly, because in any process to do anything meaningful, there's a division of duties. I know you work a lot with car dealers, right? You don't have one person building the whole car,
Right.
And it's actually funny. I'll give you the floor in a sec, but just one last thing. I think we actually use the car metaphor a lot, and then we're more in a B2B space. But what we see a lot of the times is that people will hire the driver before they have the car, right? So they'll be like, I'm going to go get this closer who's going to solve all my problems, but I don't really have a car for them to drive. So what do? They say, here's some sales collateral. They send them off out into the cold. 9 months later, that person sucked. Yeah, they got us a few meetings and stuff, but then didn't pan out. Where it's they might have sucked, but you also didn't give them.
Well, I think there's two things I want to dive into there. One is the B2B and B2C, but before we jump into that, that's a very interesting point, because when you're starting out a company, and it's you and your few band of merry merry men and women who are starting, you're right. Someone may have to do the collateral and the calls and the presentations and the proposal and all that. But for most organizations, you're right. It really is a different skill set. And maybe that's something that, if you're leading a team, for those of you listening, if you're leading a team, do you have the right people in the right positions? It's a different skill for someone who's just going to call and set up appointments versus then who's the one who comes in and, does the presentation, and then who does the paperwork or who chases the paperwork. We do have a tendency to hire that one person and hire them for one thing, put them in another position, and they get frustrated and we blame them versus, well, that closer is, I don't want to say above it or beyond it, but they're probably not cold calling someone. They're not prospecting. Those are your closers. And there is that frustration, I'm sure. So how do you recommend, again, let's put the new company aside because that's a completely different animal. But if you're advising a team, if you had to set it up, like what would your perfect team be?
Yeah, and we're a little bit unorthodox. To give context, we're often taking over the part of the BDR, right? We're kind of like an outsourced BDR model. But even if people never hire us, I think the way that we found to work is a little bit different. And to frame it out, so I can answer your question, our whole philosophy is like we did the cold outreach game for years. We tried every tactic under the sun. We did the funnels. We did every channel. We did videos. We did all these things, and it kept declining. It just didn't work that well. Even when we had clients that really had their stuff together, that had great case studies and all that stuff. It just didn't work. So then we hit this wall, and then we started experimenting with more of this relational process that we now call relationship sales at scale. And in a nutshell, it maps with the way that a lot of our clients have built their companies over the years by using their networks. The difference is that scale element. So, for example, we might have a client that's looking to reach a certain type of business. We have this list of accounts, and then we're deciding who do you know that knows somebody in those accounts. And how can we reach out to those people to get referred to specific people? Or what if we were to reach out directly to that decision maker and say, hey, we know these same people?
So very much like the way LinkedIn started. Like you really couldn't connect to someone unless someone introduced you or was the connector, versus now what LinkedIn is basically just a social network. But that's really interesting. You're going back to leveraging network and introductions versus the cold call knocking on the door.
Right. And we do direct outreach, but we don't necessarily call it cold outreach because, for example, like one of the craziest campaigns we did is we found people that played tennis in college. So we said, hey, Mr. and Ms. CMO, I used to play tennis in college too at this university. Saw you played, tennis at Penn State or whatever. We would love to connect. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be through referrals, but it's some sort of strong personal or business commonality. You've also done account-based stuff. Hey, we used to do a lot of work with IBM. So I used to work at IBM and now you're at Microsoft or whatever. But it's those sort of like almost tribal like connections that I think build a lot more trust in order to get the door open, as opposed to just this like endless onslaught of information. Right. So to kind of like tie that back to your question, I think even if people never hire us, the way to think about that is this division of duties and more of like a small team at the top of the funnel, as opposed to this like lowly BDR, wet behind the ears person, right? That cliche, this BDR is going to go open all these doors and solve my problems. I think that if you have something really brand spanking new, like software, maybe that can work. I'm not saying the teams aren't making that work, but I think it's getting harder, right? So what we recommend, and I wrote a book about this that's coming out soon that I'll plug, Relationship Sales at Scale, same name of the book. I know I didn't mention that earlier, but it covers how to do this yourself. And I think the way to do that is having a face of the campaign, right? So you might have outreach that is being conducted by a BDR or somebody that's turning the knobs for you, but you have a partner that's at least willing to get on that first call to do like a baton pass, because you're just going to get more and better meetings. It doesn't have to be a partner, but somebody that's senior enough.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's a lot more to that. A lot of it from there is about balancing personalization and scale, right? So the numbers game dynamic is still there. It's still a numbers game. You can't send out 3 pieces of outreach and expect anything to happen per day.
Right.
But the numbers have changed, right? So for contacts, we might be contacting 50, 100 people, 200 people max per business day. And that means we can personalize a lot of that outreach and also have the scale. So it's the numbers of kind of so
No, and
anyway,
that makes complete sense. You know, the way we grew our business, my brother and I, was a combination. You know, this was probably 10, 12 years ago. In the digital space, they had forums, and you would go on the forums and type, very much like Clubhouse, but typing. And posting articles in industry magazines or speaking at events. And now we host events, and now with hosting webinars or writing articles and having these types of face-to-face interactions, you're not really selling the product, but you're selling yourself. To your point, is the relationship, where someone will say, they seem very smart. And so now you have an anchor to say, well, you came to the event. It gives you permission to reach out. So then for those individuals who are on sales teams, and they're going to say, again, this goes back to the B2B, B2C combination, because I still think it's similar. How do you try to personalize? I think you still, if you're, in the case of automotive, ask them questions that you would ask them if they were standing right in front of you, start getting questions so that you can respond. In that case, a lot of times people are reaching out to you, so that gives you permission to reach back out. But what do you see as the difference between B2B and B2C, or do you really think there really is any difference?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's less of a difference than people make it out to be. I mean, if anything, I think B2B, we kind of like trick ourselves into thinking we're somehow more rational than consumers are.
Right.
But, B2B can be just as irrational. And I think that with what we do, we're at the forefront of being able to see that trend where, a lot of the things that make meetings happen are not this this ingestion of data and information to make a well-informed decision to talk to somebody. It's really like, oh, we went to the same college. Oh, they're from my hometown. It's stuff like that. It's that sort of connection. So I don't think the difference is massive. I think what's different is the sales process and what tactics you want to use, right? I think a lot of the times if you're selling to consumers, it's more of a volume play. You need to you can't be spending so much time with every person, and you need to be playing. The numbers have to get bigger because, in a B2B process, you can afford to have somebody on like a 5-step sales process.
Right.
And in auto, maybe it's a little more like that. There's some more crossover because the deal sizes are bigger or something like, but I'm less of an expert there. But I think that's the main thing. It's just kind of like the volume of leads you need and like this tactical stuff. But once you're on the phone with somebody, it's the same wiring we all have.
No, but to your point, I think that is a key that I see a lot of people miss. It's one thing if I'm talking to you. I think once any salesperson who's good at what they do, once they're in front of someone, it's just natural. It seems natural. I can see you, I can hear you, I can watch you, and now we're having a conversation. I can see where I lose you. Even on the phone, I can hear your emotion, now with video calls. It's when you're marketing to them or you're emailing to someone, if it's not engaging, or if it's not really asking a question that moves the conversation forward, right? I call it closed questions, where it's, hey, call me, Dan, if you have any questions. Well, okay, then why would you ever call me back again? Because I don't have any questions. Versus, asking you questions, in the case of a car, are you trading something in? Have you driven one of these before? Or if it's any other product, have you used these speakers before? Have you used these headphones before? What type of headphones are you looking? Are you looking for travel? All of those things that you would probably ask if they were in your store with you. And I think that's where that personalization can start moving. To your point is, once I get answers, then I can pivot. Oh, I'm going to travel. Oh, where do you like to travel? I travel. Now you're starting to, like you said, try to uncover a relationship. But I'm wondering, from when you see that, even from a B2B space, is it all just we're constantly selling product? Why my product's better versus, to your point, is asking questions to engage someone?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think there's one way to do it, right? You could have the copy could say anything. It can work in a lot of different situations. People ask, long copy, short copy. That's less important. I think for us, Yeah, like for most of our clients selling, 6, 7 figure engagements, often in the agency space, selling to brands or whatever,
Mhm.
they're not going to be able to hit somebody up and say, "Hey, buy this thing right now,"
Right.
unless they're only relying on luck, which can happen, right? If you send enough
Yes,
outreach,
of
somebody's going to have a
course.
need, and then they're going to be willing to talk. But that's not really sustainable long term. So what we're trying to do with all of our outreach, and I think this applies across the board, is just simply de-risk that first conversation. And there's a lot of ways to de-risk. I think the way that people often go wrong is that they assume that selling the product or the service is going to be the thing that de-risks that conversation, as opposed to the human one-to-one connection that you have with somebody.
Mm,
And this might be a little bit different, depending on the context, but a lot of the times, I think what we hear a lot about is nobody's going to want to take this call, right? They want to do miles of research first before they talk to me, right? How much have we heard that? In the age of the internet, it's
right.
all the battles won before it gets to the phone. And yeah, sometimes that's the case. There might be some people that want to do a lot of research, but I think increasingly, that's a huge pain for buyers, especially for professional buyers. Like they don't really, yes, they have that information at their fingertips, but sifting through it is such a pain.
Right.
Really what they're worried about is having their time wasted and getting like in an awkward interaction where they're going to get sold something. So if
Right.
you can just reduce that risk for them, even if it's like through something that's more emotive, right? Like we have this connection, we're in the same tribe. Tribe can have very negative or very positive connotations. That can be enough sometimes. So that's
No, and
kind of how we
I
think about
think
it. Yeah.
again, when you're saying all of this, my brain's just sparking into a million different directions because it's so true. I think, I've said this before, is that I think what happened before was whoever's selling the product, right? You had all the information. I had to come to you to understand the information. You're the keeper, and I have to build trust that what you're telling me is correct. Now, the age of the internet, yes, all of this information's out there, but I think we've also gone to what you had just said, to this point of saturation where there's so much information. Now I'm back to who do I believe online? And really what they're looking for from you is the expert to say, I know that's a lot out there. Let me help you understand this. Let me point you in the right direction. Let me answer your questions without being offended or, oh, these smart customers think they know everything because they internet. I think people are just too overwhelmed and all they're looking for is someone to help them, which goes back to your point, which is why I love what you're calling that idea of relationship sales, which is, I know it's crazy. I know this is a big purchase. I know it's complicated. Let me help you.
Yeah, and often, and this kind of gets a little more vague, I think, it's being able to say all those things in that outreach without actually saying them explicitly, right?
Right.
Like through implication, like we have this connection, we're doing this thing, we should talk. All that other stuff, they know, like they're buying stuff all day. They know the song and dance and what's going to happen. But
Right.
you've at least sub communicated that you're not going to waste their time or put them through something that's going to be annoying.
Right.
And then you have
Exactly.
that, and then you have that connection, and then you're re-engaging people and doing all the good habits that you should be doing, and then they're going to buy from you. That's by and large that's kind of the idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you, and you've said it multiple times, and I think it's really key for those of you listening to just don't skip over, what Dan's saying here is the idea of valuing your customer or the prospect or whoever you're talking to, valuing their time. Because it's, if you start wasting people's time with acting like you're not prepared or talking down, out of sorts or trying to show off, whatever it is, I love your word de-risking. I think you're increasing the risk that that phone is going to disconnect. They're not going to respond back. They may be polite this time, but you're never going to get back to them because all they did was go, this was a complete waste of my time, versus you were prepared, you were helpful, you moved it along based on the training that you have received to help you sell. Which leads me
Right.
into sort of this pivot. I'd like to pivot a little bit. So this idea of training. So I want you to switch your hat for a moment, because a lot of people who are listening, as I said earlier, may be in charge of something. Again, it could be a project, could be an initiative, it could be a team, could be the business. But a lot of times to your point earlier, someone gets promoted. Sometimes they're promoted for the wrong reasons. You're just because you're a great salesperson doesn't make you a great team leader or sales manager of a team. But in that arena now, putting the hat on of that person who's training, what metrics, and again, every metric could be, every team might have slightly different metrics, but if I'm managing and coaching a team, what should I be looking at? How can I help my team improve without feeling like I'm micromanaging or just, looking over their shoulder? What would you recommend?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that the biggest thing is just sort of owning the fact that you, at least as a part-time job, maybe even a 10 or 20-hour week job, you're now a sales trainer, right? And that means that you're training people like a personal trainer would. So you're devoting enough time. You're getting the right resources from people, which are usually going to be call recordings and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're probably doing a role-playing exercise, and you're fine tuning a script. I think we hear a lot of, oh, I don't want to use a script, I'm not a robot. No, the words you use matter. Saying one thing one way versus another has a completely different implication. The order of when information is presented really matters. These are specifics that don't get ironed out on their own unless you kind of iron them out deliberately. Now, how people want to say things might differ a little between the person, and they have to own it. They have to feel comfortable with what they're saying. But I think that sort of level of like blocking and tackling and specificity is the most important thing. And I think a lot of the times what we see is like nobody's really like taking the lead on that. They're like, this person should just come and know how to do that. And the fact is, the best salespeople that we've ever encountered, like the fastest the Michael Jordan of sales ramps up, is still going to be at least a few months, on any given new offer or market or whatever. So that's the first thing. In terms of metrics, I think there's different schools of thought on this, and yeah, a lot of it's going to be contextual. But what's worked for us is thinking about it in terms of falsifiable metrics. So you don't fool yourself. Like, one of the words I hate most is qualified, right? Like, you ask 10 different people, you get 10 different definitions of qualified.
Right.
Quality, same idea. Engage, like there's always vagaries we just use.
Right.
So what I like is, actions that people have taken. Have they responded? It's a yes or no question. Responded positively, let's say. If it's say F off, then that's negative. But you can make a judgment call, I guess. A meeting booked, that's pretty falsifiable. Depending on your cycle, you might have a proposal call. So that's the next call after that. And then are all the decision makers going to show up or not? That's pretty falsifiable. And then a deal being signed, piece of paper is also falsifiable. So I think if you think about it in terms of those metrics, you'll be able to, judge performance over enough time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I loved about that, and again, folks, hope you're listening, that using the word trainer, like you said, a personal trainer. I love always using the word coach, because manager has a tendency, we all think of a manager behind a desk. If we played sports in school, I always ask the teams that I've been brought in to talk to and say, how many of you played sports? A lot of them raised their hands. And they said, well, where was your coach during practice? Where was your coach during the game? Right. And a lot of times, to your point, and I love just taking a bit of time, because that will be pushback. People are like, well, I can't do it. No, but if you're there for X number of hours, if you said 20% of my work week, whatever that is dedicated to training and developing, I still have other duties, but it is that coaching. And I love that, we have steps. Every company has their step. Everybody has their way of presenting, and that has to be ironed out. So when you bring someone in, it is not a gift. Meaning like you were born with this. I remember I was an actor for a long time, and I remember sitting there listening to other actors go, oh, the director's squashing my creativity, and the director would say, well, these are the words that you have to say. And you also have to be over on the side of stage when you say that line, or it makes no sense. You thinking, oh, I'll just wander around. And actually, the more structured you were, it was counterintuitive. The more structured you were, the freer you were, because you knew where you had to be at what time. So very similar to what you're saying. If I know my order of presentation and I know my product, I can actually sit and listen and not worry, because I know where I'm going next, or I know where I have to pivot. That's that confidence, but that only comes through And that's why I like the word the personal trainer. It only comes through with someone who's going to dedicate time to getting better at these skills. And it does take time, but it has to be consistent. You need a coach to watch what you're doing and give you feedback. I really love that. But to that point, then, when you get in, is that one of the things that's usually missing? If someone calls you up and says, we're struggling at sales, is that one of the first places you look and say, well, here's your problem. You're not training your people?
It's a good question. It is. I mean, it was when we were working with much smaller organizations, I think, and it's less now. But there still are often various gaps that people have. I think that the biggest issue is, like, you want that closer to be spending at least 80% of, probably 90% of his or her time closing deals, like getting on calls with people. So, and that's where we come in, and we're kind of like the top of the funnel need there. But yeah, I mean, we do see that often where the organization has never really had to figure out how to specifically order their pitch, because they've survived on referrals and these sort of things for so long that kind of allow you to get away with bad habits, right? Because when by the time you're encountering an opportunity, they're solution aware, they know what they want, and you come in with that trust, which is great. Like, by all means, do everything you can to increase the number of referrals you get, but that's a tough way to build a scalable sales team, right? So when we've gone through this ourselves, we recently hired a salesperson. She's done really well. She unfortunately left to pursue an entrepreneurial opportunity, but we were on the right track. And it took, I mean, even us, and we do outbound sales all day, and there's still a lot of questions that we had to figure out about scripting, and that's where a lot of the hard work went. It was just going back and forth, and maybe this should go there, actually it should come here, doing that sort of thing all day. But there's nothing that's more lucrative than that sort of work, I think.
No, and so again, folks listening, it's that trainer, it's mapping things out so that you have a plan. I mean, it's very odd that we would disown. Now, it's hard to say because the New York sports teams are very frustrating at this moment in time. But, if they just ran around without a playbook, you would say these people don't know what they're doing. But yet, for some reason, we think it's okay for a salesperson to not have a playbook, to not have a script, to not have boundaries, and then we wonder why they're frustrated, why they're not generating results. I think that's really important. But I also really liked what you were saying earlier, is understanding the actions it takes, right? So, once you get to that funnel of, presentation or demonstration and a proposal went out and we're going to go, but even back further to say, what am I doing every day? What actions am I taking to engage? Is it phone calls? Is it emails? Is it whatever it is, understanding that as a leader of that team, then you can start to pull the levers. Because if we're getting a lot of demonstrations, but we're not getting to proposals, well, we got to go fix that. If we know what our percentage is, well, if we do X number of if we do 10 demonstrations, we should send out 7 proposals. And all of a sudden this person is sending out 3, you're going, okay, they're off, but I need to know the metrics, or even how many phone calls or how many prospects I need to really work to generate those demonstrations. And all of a sudden we're going, well, wait a minute, that means I have to go target that training to listen what they're saying to see why, oh, they're off script. Right. So I think it's really important for again, audience, what Dan's saying here is it's really important to have that structure of what someone should be doing, but knowing the metrics that are going to generate that end result, like working backwards, right? Every deal, we got to have two contracts to get one deal. And we got to have 4 demonstrations to get 2 contacts. And we have to have this many to get that many, and you back it out. Now you have the ability to see who's struggling where. Now your time as a trainer is better served. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that a lot of the times, like when in our world, when we say, hey, you need to process, all this stuff, people they flip out and they say, great, I'll go develop this stuff. But it's kind of like that, the Mike Tyson line. It's that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth sort of thing. Right. It's like you need enough going in the top of the funnel to inform, to inform these materials. They don't come out of nothing. And often that means if you're starting from, a place of not having this stuff put together, it's kind of a less is more situation. It's think about what's gone right, and then, add to that as you need, and add to make the funnel more like longer and more complicated as needed, as opposed to starting from that. Yeah.
Right. And again, I want to harp on this just a touch, because I think it's key, is this idea of having everything mapped out. What should your salespeople be saying? What should be first and or second and or third? Because randomness, you may sell and you could say, well, look, I sold, but you're never going to scale on, if I have 10 people on my sales team and everybody's doing it their own way, how am I supposed to lead a team? I can't remember what 10 people's process is versus, no, this is the way we do it here, and get everyone aligned, and then their personality layered on top. I used to always say, if I strip away everybody's, the way they do everything, the technique underneath should pretty much be the same. What layers on top of it is your personality. You may be more talkative than I am, or you have a better sense of humor than I do, whatever it is, but we all hit our steps. We may weave them a little differently, but we hit our steps. That's the structure for success. And that allows you, I think, to scale, to your point, or else you're going to hit a plateau eventually of frustration or churn of finding salespeople that can do this if you don't have a structure for them to execute.
Yeah. And the best salespeople on earth that you interview, if they're really good, they're going to convince you to hire them, whether or not you have all that process there. And then they often will go to a greener pasture, or if they're not good enough, you'll just not, make your money back on those people. So having that, knowing that even if you're building that for the first time, like knowing that building block needs to be there, is important. And if you're in an ownership position or a senior position, that might mean you sitting in that seat at least for a little while, in order to build out that process before you hire that closer, just to do everything.
No, and again, I think we make a mistake, and I'd love your feedback from what you see, but I think a lot of people make the mistake that they think everybody's the closer, right? Everybody's that great. And I actually think differently. I think if I call it the middle 60. If I have 10 people, I'm going to have 2 people that are just rock stars. They get it natural, like that natural gift of gab, and they do what we need them to do, but there's just something different about them. And then you got the other bottom 20, either new people coming in or people going out. But that middle 60 needs that structure. They rely on that structure. And if we make a mistake thinking all of those people are we can get them all to be superstars, and probably not. But if I could get all of them to sell one more, versus I need you to go from selling 2 deals a month to 10 deals a month, those people are going, I can't do this, and they'll quit, versus really honing it. And I think that's the key. And I think that's one thing that's missing in a lot of sales teams, is that structure, because those middle 60 need it. And they're depending on it and want it. And if you have it, then I think you really can scale, because those people will be successful because they just want to come in and do what you told them to do. And they're successful, versus I don't want to come in and every day it's something new and something different. Yeah. Those top 2 people, they'll adapt, but the middle 60, you end up blowing people out because you keep changing things on them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think related to that, there's like two areas that, if you don't mind me just venting about things that I often hear. I think the first is something to the effect of, and this is more in the B2B space. I think in the car, automotive, like we got to sell some cars here, people. Like that's tried and true. People know what that's about. But in the B2B space, especially in agencies, there's what I see a lot is this sort of like, I'm a special snowflake. Nobody can sell but me. We're not like other organizations. We can't scale sales teams.
Right.
It's got to be different for each client. It's got to be this. And I'm just like looking out, I'm here in New York, you're not too far. There's this skyline of buildings of, complex service businesses that have scaled to multinational levels by building sales teams. Like, why do you think, I'm not saying you have to become multinational, but why do you think you're any different? So that's the first one. The other one, which I think you hear a lot about from sort of like disruption based books and journalists, people that aren't really business owners or have never had to hire anyone. It's a lot of this sort of take of interviews don't matter. How many times have you heard this?
Right.
Performance is not correlated with interview performance and all this stuff. And it's like, you really dig into the data these people are presenting, and it's like they're looking at these broad averages across like low skill level jobs. So for one, like, whoever wants average performance, if you're hiring anybody, you want above average. And interviews are great. Interviews tell you a lot, as do references, and like, we've really put a lot more energy into interviews, and it's never going to get you to 100% hiring success, but it's going to improve your odds. And, if you make a good hire versus a bad hire, that's a countless amount of money. So anyway, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but it's just one of those things that irritates me when I read it.
No, but I think this is key, because the audience out there is listening, because as I said earlier, I started this podcast because a lot of people were put in positions to lead a team, and they're looking around going, I need help. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to hire. Is hiring, I wasn't interviewed, right? So a lot of times it's, well, I was never interviewed, or I was never trained, so why do I have to train someone? In reality, you don't understand that actually interviewing is the key, and understanding what questions to ask to find the right people that are going to be willing to do the work, right? That's the key. Is I could sell, but every business, their process is different. How to get to that sale may be different, right? If I'm working, I've hired salespeople, and I've made tons of mistakes where someone said, oh, I worked at this company, I was very successful selling. But to your point, they were a closer. They came in after someone teed it all up, or even after the proposal was out. No, but I need somebody to be on the phones to do more of the, as you said, the entry level, or the prospecting, or the farming, so to speak. And if you're not clear to say, no, that's what I need you to do, you end up hiring incorrectly. And then to your point, you wasted your time, you wasted their time, you wasted money, frustrating. And then all you're doing is, wow, then I think you really do get into the point of saying, I can't scale a team, because you haven't thought everything through. You're not presenting to the candidate what exactly you need to do. Like, paint the picture of their day-to-day, paint the picture of a typical week. And if you really say, no, this is what you do every single day, and if someone goes, yeah, cool, okay, I got it, then there's no misunderstanding.
Right, exactly. And even just drilling down to the top of the funnel, not even the closer, but the top of the funnel, which is getting people to agree to speak. There's like 3 different skill sets there. And in our experience, there's creativity or strategy. This is the high level stuff that you need maybe an owner or a high level person to think about, which is, who are our clients? How are we converting them to buy? It's a lot of the tactics that I talked about earlier, relationships and whatnot. There's systems thinking and technical skills that go into the list building, the software, whether you're using phone or email or LinkedIn or Passenger Pigeon or whatever. There's systems that go into that. And then there's a good amount of hustle, right? Somebody that is going to be on the ball, that somebody's flakes, are they calling them up to get them back onto the calendar again? And that sort of thing. And those are like 3 different skill sets and 3 different jobs. And depending on the size of your team, you might have to wear multiple hats, but even just that top of funnel, like BDR role, the idea that you're going to like hire one person and they're going to know how to like build lists, but also cold call, like, maybe, but it's unlikely, So the idea is, like, if you're hiring that role, you're supporting them, like, you're putting time towards those sorts of tasks. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I could chat with you all day. So one last pivot before we ask our closing 5 questions that we always do. So tell me about you. Like, how did you end up here? Like, if I roll back to my son now is in 11th grade, and I saw in 10th grade a sort of a switch. So let's say 10th grade, 11th grade, Dan, similar to who you are now, something changed. If you look back and you go, oh yeah, this was always in me, or whatever, like, how did you end up doing this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I was never the like, entrepreneur's day kid that coming up with business ideas or whatever. I think that for me, I mostly just was terrified of the monotony of being stuck in a job and having to do the same thing every day and having to ask somebody for permission to go on vacation and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
Of course, the constant irony is like you end up working more than you might have if you have
Right.
standard 3-4 week vacation. So that was me. You know, I went to college, went to UC Santa Cruz, kind of moved to New York, worked some internships and stuff, landed in the agency space, got another job in sales, and then eventually just quit. Did the Tim Ferriss thing for a while, self-published business books. I did the whole like course thing on Udemy, and then realized that, okay, the thing that I kind of know is sales. People need help with lead gen, so let me make this lead gen company. So it was kind of just, sometimes I jokingly liken it to the format of Breaking Bad, but not negative, not criminal, where it's like he's just making these decisions, and then there's one decision,
right.
another, but there's never like a grand strategy. So that's been my experience anyway.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I always ask that question, and it's always interesting. Sometimes people don't think about it. You know, like through all of their jobs, there's this common thread. You know, forget the title, forget where you worked. You know, and I say, well, is there some common thread? And people go, oh, no one ever asked me that, but there was always this, and or completely different. Someone says, I started this way and then I went that way. So it's a fascinating thing to ask people, how they move, because, the days of staying in a job 40, 50, 60 years and retiring is less and less and less. And there are so many options out there for people to pivot and try new things. But sales are sales,
Yeah, and I'm sure we could do a whole other episode on that. But yeah, I think it's definitely changing. You know, I was kind of part of a lot of these bootstrapped digital nomad entrepreneur communities. I think we all thought we were special for a while, but
right,
then the world changed overnight, and now it's sort of like there's less of this dividing line, I think, between entrepreneur and employee. There still is. Starting your own business is no small feat. But this idea that like I'm going to be my own boss, it's like, no, you start a business, you work with other people, you collaborate with other people, you work with clients.
Yeah.
And now they're all remote,
I agree. I think it's changed. I mean, when I was growing up, I'm older than you are, but having your own business, sometimes people looked at it a little odd, like, oh, because you couldn't go work at AT&T or you couldn't work at the big company, so you started your own. Where now entrepreneurship is cool, but to your point is, I don't think people understand all of the ins and outs. They just think, oh, free time. And you start going, oh, I haven't taken a vacation in a while, or I'm working all the time, or something's always happening. There's always something to do to move it forward, versus I can go leave for 3 weeks vacation, 2 weeks vacation. I'll see you. And I don't have to think about work till I come back in, the day after my vacation ends,
Yeah, for better or worse, it changes you, and your business is always kind of with you, at least for me anyway.
Listen, it's for me too. So, you understand that. So listen, this was a lot of fun. So at the end of every episode, I ask 5 questions. They're all focused on the one thing. So don't overthink them. Just go. Let me get my glass here. Okay. So what's the one thing that you can't live without? It's the one thing you need with you, or you always have to have. What's the one thing you can't live without?
Yeah. For me, it's exercise. I think in the form of grappling, and like Brazilian jiu-jitsu and wrestling is kind of my main way of. It's not just exercise; it's the gamification of it, and it's very, very addictive. If I'm traveling, I got to find somewhere to train after a couple of days. I'm kind of hankering for that. So that's it for me. Yeah, for better or worse.
I have a team member. Yeah, I have a team member who does the same thing. So when we travel, if we're there for a couple of days, he's like, I have to go find some place to train.
Yeah.
So, he needs it for his clarity, as he says, more for it's for his body, but he says it's really for my mind to really stay sharp. Okay, next one. What is one of the things that you value most in other people?
Oh, so that's a really good question. I think that a big one is just kind of like intellectual honesty. I think more and more, just being willing to. And it's not like I'm perfect in this either, but it's something that I pick up on, is just being able to, admit when you're wrong, or say or honestly challenge me on things.
Right.
Being able, like, I grew up in a household, I was, a Jewish family and a lawyer dad. So we'd argue constantly. So I'm used to arguing with people. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with that. And it's not a bad thing. It's not destructive always. It can be, but not always.
No, I like
Yeah.
that. Let's see. If I gathered all of your friends and family into a room and asked them to describe you in one word, what's the word they would use to describe you?
Oh man. That's a good question. I've heard this. This is just because I've heard this recently from a number of different sources,
Okay.
and I've heard easygoing, which I get a lot. But in my own head, I don't feel that at all. So I don't know if it's true, but at least outwardly, I seem to get that a lot. Sometimes.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah.
What's a book or a movie that inspires you that you always go back to, like a book that you either read multiple times, or if somebody says, hey, I need a good book that's going to help me in my life or business, what's a book you would recommend, or a movie or podcast or something that inspires you?
Yeah, I think that like there's probably a lot, but I think the one that I found myself going back to is War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. It's just sort of broadly applicable. It has the right amount of woo without too much woo stuff.
Right.
It's it's actionable, but it's not. But it's also just very inspiring and compelling, I think. So and it's very readable and short. So I like that book a lot. Yeah.
Good. We'll link it in the show notes for everybody so they can go get that. Last one. We've talked about a lot of different things here today, Dan, and all great stuff, and very, very, I really appreciate the time you took, because your answers are very thoughtful and very tactical. But if you would hope that the listeners took one thing away from this whole conversation, one thing they could take away, what is that one thing that you want them to go, if you got one thing out of our conversation, this is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest one is basically focusing on those bigger, like high leverage activities, right? Prioritization, I guess, is the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you could drill down to any sort of situation, right? That could mean who you're hiring and so on. So I don't know if that sums everything up enough, but that's the thing that comes to mind, which is prioritization in terms of who am I contacting, how am I contacting them, who's doing this, as opposed to getting stuck with the software or with some various tactic. Even the tactics I've talked about, I wouldn't even think about that before prioritizing the big stuff. If I can plug one more book, not mine, but somebody else's. One that's really helped me recently with this is The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham.
I love the title.
It's a great title. But basically, he's really good at laying out questions, or encouraging the reader to ask good questions about his or her business. So that's been good for my prioritization, I think.
Great. Yeah. And I love that, because I think that was one of my reinforced and reminded me of, some of the things I talk about, but even a good thing for me and my team to rethink and just say, is everything mapped out at that point, so that we know what we're supposed to be doing? Because we could hire the best people, but if we have them either in the wrong position, doing the wrong thing, chasing the wrong audience, nobody wins. So you need to constantly remind yourself, and it potentially it could evolve and or change. So constantly have to look at it and refine it, so that you're always being more effective. So great. So again, man, Dan, thank you so much for being here. This has been a lot of fun. So please tell the audience how they can connect with you, where they can find you, company wise and or so personally, to reach out if people have questions or just want to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. And Glenn, really appreciate it. So the best way is saleschema.com. We actually have a webinar that goes through a lot of the stuff if anyone's interested, which is just saleschema.com/relationships, plural. And I'm always happy to nerd out with anybody on the stuff. Just Dan@saleschema.com is my email, or LinkedIn. Whatever.
Great. Yep. And we'll put all that in the show notes as well. All right. Awesome. So again, thank you so much. This has been phenomenal. And I'm sure the audience, listen, folks, I hope you had your pen and paper next to you, and then go back and listen to this over and over and over again, because Dan gave you a lot of information. So as we say, always, I thank you for your time. Please make sure if you found value today that you subscribe to the show, share it out. I'm sure there's someone in your network that could benefit from what Dan was talking about today to help their business themselves get more organized. So please make sure you share it out. Don't forget to rate the podcast. If you want to watch the episode, you can jump over to YouTube, or you can listen to it on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. We are there. Just type in "You're in Charge" and you will find it. Again, I appreciate your attention. I know there's a lot of places for you to listen to different shows and get your information, but the fact that you spent some time with Dan and me means the world. So as I say at the end of every episode, you're in charge. But whenever you start saying to yourself, now what? Now what do I do? Well, we're here to help you every single week with guests like Dan to give you tactics and tips to help you become better, both personally and professionally. So thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Again, Dan, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Appreciate it.